was a rather hot summer morning, around 11 a.m. A friend of mine and I had decided to try some Datura. I felt good in both body and mind, having had a good night's sleep. We started off by taking some of the leaf of a wild plant growing in the backyard, rolling it into a cigarette. I would say there was approximately 1.5 grams of dried leaf material smoked. We then decided to sit and wait for an onset effect. After a period of almost an hour, we agreed there was no noticeable effect from the leaf, so we moved to eating the seeds. The pods from which the seeds were taken had been harvested from the same plant as the leaf. We had dried the pods for about 2 weeks before removing the seeds. All of the seeds were dry and ranged from a dark brown to black. In total, there must have been over 1,000. We carefully counted out 75 seeds for each of us and ate them as they were. This was followed by another period of waiting that lasted for another hour. Once again, the consensus was that there was no noticeable effects. This prompted the eating of 75 more seeds, bringing the total to 150. At this point, we decided to walk to a mutual friend's house and share some of the seeds we had with him. It was on that walk that the Datura started to show its effects. I felt a bit warmer than usual, and I was having light hot flashes that traveled up my body from feet to head. I later found that this may have been caused by the vascular dilating properties of the atropine. I didn't have any trouble thinking, and my motor skills were unaffected. But as time progressed, the effects became more intense, and I noticed that I stopped sweating. My mouth became dry. I felt as though I should be sweating from the heat radiating off my body, and I queried my partner as to whether he felt the same. He confirmed that he did. He also suggested that we find some shade and rest a bit. We stopped at a 7-Eleven and checked the time for record's sake, and it was 1:30 p.m. It was then when we stopped that I noticed my heart rate was well above normal. I took my pulse and got it around 120 BPM. We got some drinks and sat in the store drinking, wondering if it was such a good idea to be out in the heat. The temperature outside was reaching close to the 100-degree mark. After a 20-minute rest at the 7-Eleven, we started off again to our destination. In only 10 minutes of walking, I started to feel the beginning effects of heat stroke, and so did my friend. We once again had to stop and rest. The total time period we laid in the shade is unknown to me. When we felt that it was safe to continue, we walked the rest of the way. Although it was less than a quarter mile, we felt as if we had walked across the Sudan. The effects had not intensified much more with the exception of the dry mouth. It was as if every last drop of water had been sucked from my body. It hurt to swallow, and I was in desperate need of some water. We got into a friend's house at just 2 p.m. and rehydrated ourselves. We counted out 150 seeds for our friend and took 100 more ourselves. The same effects we had experienced before got a bit more intense as time slid by. I noticed a definite dilation of my pupils. I also had trouble reading small print or seeing smaller objects any distance. The waves of heat were pulsing through my body at a comfortable rate, and they made me feel at peace with myself. My friend and I had both assumed laid-out positions on our back, and we were resting well. At around 2:45, I consumed 50 more seeds. The same effects continued for a good 3 hours, and I noticed no change in mindset or motor control. However, at around 6 p.m., I started to have problems with my fine motor skills. I found it difficult to move my fingers and pick up small objects. My eyesight had become a bit worse, and I started to notice a major change in perception. In particular, there was a nail sticking out of the wall in the room that seemed to be moving through the grain, up and down, and then side to side. This only lasted for 2 minutes or so. However, the naps of the carpet began to twitch furiously. At this point, I began having to use the restroom constantly, this being the diuretic properties of the Datura. I couldn't keep much water in my body, so I resorted to drinking Gatorade. I don't have much memory of waiting for the sun to go down, but I do remember waiting for that. The next clear memory I have is looking out the window and seeing that the sun was down. And my state of mind had obviously moved towards a lack of judgment because I decided it was safe to walk home. The time of my departure from my friends was around 9 p.m. I was no longer feeling the body high. Either I had become used to it or it had gone away. My heart was racing at an ungodly rate, but I didn't notice unless I specifically checked. When I reached about a quarter of the way home, I began to talk to my friend who had been with me earlier in the morning as I walked. We were having an in-depth conversation on a topic which I cannot remember, but when he suddenly veered off and laid down in a patch of grass. This alarmed me, because I knew that Datura may have severe adverse effects on the body, causing coma and even death. I started walking over to him so that I might get him up or carry him to the nearest place we could get help when he just disappeared. I must have looked and yelled around for him for about half an hour. I finally gave up and decided it was best to head to my house. It was then that I started to notice flashes of light in the peripherals of my vision. I looked around to discover the source of the flashes and could not find one, so I continued walking. I saw a large, white puffy object that resembled a mushroom of some variety I'd never seen. When I approached it, it was very large. The top had a diameter of about 4 inches and it had a very stubby stalk. This, however, was not what caused me to walk over. It was the flashes of light inside the cap that interested me. It looked almost like a video of neurons firing in somebody's brain. It was very real to me. I could touch it. It was not until much later that I even realized that I'd been hallucinating. Everything was real to me. I had no more hallucinations on the way to my house. I did, however, start to have major motor control problems. My hands were almost twitching out of control and it felt as though my knees were going to give out at times. I began to worry, almost panicked at the fact that my knees were coming out from under me. It took all the concentration I had just to keep moving. At this point, I felt that if I had fallen, I would not have been able to get back up. However, I did make it safely back to my house. Upon arriving at my home, I immediately checked the time and was flabbergasted to see it was just 11:20 p.m. A walk that usually takes no more than 20 minutes took me over 2 hours. I forgot about the time when my stomach rumbled loudly and quickly went to make myself a nice cool bowl of cereal. As I was making my cereal, I remembered listening to an episode of Drew Carey on the TV. It was the April Fool's episode with all the pop-ups from Pop-Up Video. The show was coming to an end as I walked into the living room and sat down to eat. I ate several spoonfuls of cereal and looked up to see what was coming on next. The TV was not even on. It was at this point that I finally made a separation and realized that I had been hallucinating. I finished eating quickly, took a long cold shower and went to bed. Now as for lasting effects, the only one that plagued me was the fact that my pupils remained completely dilated for over a week. I could not read any small print, street signs, or anything from a distance. As for my friend who went to sleep in the grass, I called his house to see if he'd made it home and he answered the phone. The first words out of my mouth were, "Oh good, you made it back. You have no idea how relieved I am about that." His reply stunned me, as it still does every time I think about it. I never left the house last night. We argued for a long time, because in my mind it really happened. He was there, he laid down, and then I couldn't find him. But it was confirmed by the people who lived there that he never left the house with me that night. I will never do Datura again. It is definitely not a recreational psychedelic. In fact, it is not a psychedelic at all. It causes your body to go into a near-death delirium by raising your body temperature to dangerously high levels, raising your heart rate to equally high levels, and drying every moisture-producing gland in your body. I found it to be dangerous and very unspiritual. They are real hallucinations, meaning that you cannot tell the difference between a hallucination and reality. I do not recommend that anyone ever try to use Datura for a recreational purpose, or at all for that matter. I feel to this day that had I not been in as good of a shape as I was, that it would have killed me. However, if you do decide to use it, I do have several guidelines that you should follow to help ensure your own safety, and they are as follows. 1. Find a place where you can remain at complete rest. You should not walk anywhere or undertake any heavy activity. A heavy activity in this case can be defined as anything more than moving slowly about. 2. Keep plenty of water on hand. The drying of your glands has an extremely fast and sudden onset. Your throat will become so dry that it will hurt to swallow at all. 3. Do not, under any circumstances, take any other drugs, whether they are prescription or not. 4. It is imperative you have a sober trip sitter available to you the entire time, so that immediate action can be taken if you take a turn for the worse. 5. If you start to feel sick, do not make yourself vomit. This will only dehydrate your already dried out body even more. If the sickness gets any worse, call an ambulance. 6. You should write down how much you took and what part of the plant it came from. The strain of the plant is also important because there are many different types of Datura. This is information a doctor may need in order to treat you. Do not be afraid to tell the doctors what you have done, as it could save your life. In the event that the hot flashes become too intense or you're starting to feel a bit ill, you should fill a bathtub with cold water and get in. This will help you keep from overheating. 7. Do not smoke or use anything that may raise your heart rate even more. Heart rates have been recorded at 160 ppm while on Datura. This includes smoking cigarettes, as nicotine is a stimulant. Whatever you do, don't try to take sedatives. If you feel that bad, go to the hospital. Yes, they will pump your stomach, but a bit of discomfort beats not living any day. 8. And my last tip is to not do it at all.